Hello, good evening, and welcome back to another episode of Make Mine Movies. My name is Sinead.
And my name is Breffney.
How are you, Breff? How's your week been?
Do you know, I haven't really gone anywhere or done all that much this week, funnily enough.
Funny that.
Yeah, I can't really imagine any sort of, external parameters or government directives that would dictate why my week has been so dull, but here we are. The main thing is that I'm currently on holidays, which I booked a while ago, and so far the most useful thing I've done is take things out of my bedroom and attempt to start painting. So, if nothing else, it's been a constructive part to this week. But how about yourself? How's it been?
It's been fine. I feel like I've been far more productive in like general life things this week than I have at any other time in my life. All of my clothes are clean. My room is bloody spotless. And I've been using, whilst we're recording, also seeing each other via Zoom. And I've been using Zoom an awful lot and doing a lot of like video calls, which has been very nice.
Oh, that's good. That's good. I mean, like the most important thing that any of us can do at a time like this when everything is completely mental is just keep up with the people around us who we care so much about. Yeah. And just try and keep a certain element of normalcy. In as much as we can, through a webcam, but here we are, and it's really good to do that. I've been on a few sort of different Skype calls, popped on Discord here once or twice to just hang out with people, and it's been really, really good. And I would encourage everyone to do this as much as humanly possible, because if nothing else, at a time when you can't really leave either your room or your house or whatever it may be. And depending if you're looking after, say, with the newer controls that have come in since last week, where, say, the over 70s have to, cocoon themselves. This is more so accurate in my case because both my parents are, well, one of my parents is over 70 and one will kill me if I admit that she's very close to being over 70. So I won't say that. Instead, I will say that as a general advisory, if you have to go out and you have to look after, say, older parents or things like that, just being able to keep up with your friends and find out how everyone is doing is a very good way to keep you sane.
Yeah, absolutely. I recorded an episode of Mickey Waffles with Kate. We figured it out via the lovely platform that we're also recording on. So we should be able to keep up with regular episodes of that. And this will be going out on Saturday morning. So if you're listening to it day of release, we'll have just had our Disney drinks and Disney hangout. And there's a quiz involved. And I'm very excited.
There is a quiz. And I have not been let anywhere near this quiz, which is definitely for the better because I'm not allowed to do that anymore.
Nope.
I did it once for the Dublin Film Festival, and everyone hated me, so I'm not allowed to do quizzes anymore. But Kate was absolutely fantastic and put one together.
Mm-hmm.
So we're looking forward to that. So if that has already happened in the past, then I'm happy to have met you.
Yes.
Yes.
And we're probably a little hungover right now, if you're listening to this bang on when it gets released.
We probably are. There was presumably rather a lot of libations consumed.
Indeed. But hopefully you should be able to do another one of these quizzes in a few weeks. We'll wait and see what people think and all that good stuff.
Absolutely.
So, with all that being said, shall we get on to talking about this week's movie?
We can indeed, because there was a triumphant performance for 101 Dalmatians.
Can you tell it was Breffney's pick?
Do you know, it was in fact my pick, and it was going up against, admittedly, a film that I also love, which is the Aristocats. So I would have, if I take my competitive hat off for a second, I would have been perfectly happy talking about either of them. But I'm going to put it back on and just go, 101 Dalmatians was the correct victor, and I'm delighted we're talking about it today.
Yeah, absolutely. I was kind of happy either way. You said that because in the past few months we've watched the Aristocats, so you said that you would rather watch 101 Dalmatians, which is entirely fair. So maybe Aristocats will get thrown back into another poll at some stage. We shall see. So as we've mentioned, we're going to be talking about the 1961 101 Dalmatians.
We are indeed. Now, whenever you say 101 Dalmatians, it can be a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So we are talking about, as you mentioned, the 1961 animated film, which strictly speaking is spelled in words rather than numbers. So 101 Dalmatians, which is fine if you know this. If you don't, however, Disney Plus is really, really difficult to search on for it.
Yep, that's what happened to me.
Yep. And I just happened to remember that little idiosyncrasy, but But just to give you a little bit of background to this film, it is based on the novel The 101 Dalmatians, which is yet another spin on the title by Dodie Smith. So this was released at a time in 1961, I believe it was January 1961, when Disney was in Disney was in a rather significant financial slump after Sleeping Beauty, which was very successful but also very, very expensive. Yeah. So 101 Dalmatians was made for significantly less money. Specifically, I believe it was around $3.6 million. So they needed 101 Dalmatians to do very well, whilst also the acknowledgement internally was that they didn't have a huge amount of money to develop it, and as such they couldn't realistically have the same top tier talent necessarily they had working on Sleeping Beauty previously, and there was a little bit of a crossover in the productions, as there tends to be with animation, because the time to make them is so huge. Especially at that time. So they needed this to be a success to pull it out of its financial slump. And it was, in a colossal way. It made, at that time, $303 million
Damn.
At the box office, which adjusted for inflation, I believe, is somewhere over $1 billion.
Wow.
So this was it's insane. And you would not look at 101 Dalmatians and think, this is $1 billion film, but effectively it was. It really was at that time. And it helped Disney sort of re-secure itself in the marketplace and then move on to other projects. And having said that, with a literary adaptation, as Disney tended to do within this period, like you see a lot with, the Jungle Book adaptation of Rudyard Kipling and a few other ones besides. Winnie the Pooh was also around this time, coming from the A.A. Milne stories. A lot of their films were based on established properties and just kind of going in X, Y, or Z. This was also around the time of Mary Poppins.
Oh, yeah.
So rather than necessarily developing their own stories at that point, they were more, from a financial perspective, banking on things that people already knew.
Yeah.
So they leaned a lot towards literary adaptations, and this being one of them. And it turned out to be, in this particular instance, a roaring success for them.
Or a barking success.
Alternatively, a barking success. That was a bit of a rough reference.
Hey.
So this has been Make Mine Movies. Thanks for listening.
Goodbye. So I've looked up some fun facts about the movies. Not that your facts aren't fun, sweetie, but some
finances are very fun. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So you mentioned the author of the story, Dodie Smith. It's actually based off a real life scenario that she had happen. So she had a pet Dalmatian that happened to have 15 puppies, one of which looked like it was going to die, and her husband managed to revive it. Now, they didn't hang on to all the puppies. I think they sold most of them and kept a few, but it is based off a real life tale. And when she wrote the story, she had openly said within interviews and stuff like that her main goal was for Disney to buy the rights to the movie, and she wanted it to be made into a Disney movie the whole time. So a very different story from this movie and, for example, the likes of Mary Poppins, if you have ever seen Saving Mr. Banks or know any of the background behind that. Another thing to note is all the dogs were given deeper voices than their humans, specifically to show authority. So if you actually listen to any of the voices of the dogs, it's very, very different to their humans, and it's much more deep. So it's to show that authority over their humans. You'll notice that they also always refer to their humans as their pets, which I found quite gas. Nice little detail in there. Another thing to note is that all of the male dogs wear red collars and all of the female dogs wear blue collars. You can see this mainly, obviously, in Pongo and Perdita, but it's a little nuance that they throw in there.
I did notice that, actually. That was a nice little detail.
Yeah. And then one final one, because if there's a Silly Symphonies reference in a movie, I would be behooved not to mention it. So a lot of people think that the little animation that you can see the puppies watching when they're in Hell Hall is the very famous Flower and Garden Silly Symphonies. It is actually not. It is from 1929, the same year as the Skeleton Dance, FYI. And it is called Springtime. But it's nice to see the Silly Symphonies kind of getting dropped in, because even at that stage, that particular Silly Symphonies was over 40 years old, which is madness.
It's madness. It's absolutely mad when you think about it, considering that this particular movie is nearly 60 years old.
Before we get into our main notes, literally the first thing I have written down is I always forget how old this movie is.
Yep, it is much, much earlier than people think it is.
I always think it's like a mid-80s movie, but absolutely not.
Yeah, not at all. When I was a kid, I would have thought it was maybe, before I knew all that much about Disney, I would have thought it was like early 70s.
Yeah.
But I would not have put it, I would not have placed it back in the 60s at all.
No. Okay, cool. So getting into the movie. So first thing to call out is this is in the era of Disney when they would put what is traditionally known as the end credits right up front at the start.
Yes, which is a throwback to a very, very early approach to cinema, because if you go back and you watch older films that were obviously shown in the cinema, so you're talking basically anywhere from about 1930 onwards, the reason they did this is because the general assumption was that people wouldn't want to stick around for the credits at the end of the film. So in order to get people, I guess, the exposure to get their names out there and to pay tribute to the people who made it, they would run the credits first. And of course this generally ran all the way up until pretty much the 1980s, when a bunch of cinemas largely complained that on top of the trailers that were even being added in at that point before films, or the small newsreels that they had even before then, that it was taking too long to actually get to the film that people paid to see. So as a result, they got moved to the back, and as productions got bigger, so did the credit lists. So people didn't want to be sitting through 10 minutes worth of credits at the start. On top of that, the sequences also became really quite hard to do because it still needed to be visually interesting as opposed to the traditional black background with white text that we have now. So what that meant essentially was, with this particular film, we get a whole bunch of different art styles going on.
Yeah.
And a very sort of hard to place location for this film. I know it's based in London.
Yeah.
It never felt like London to me. And part of the reason for that is the animation style, and part of that comes from the opening credits, but I'll get a little bit to it in the opening scene as well, where it feels very similar to almost like Hervé animation, so like Tintin.
Okay.
It feels a little bit closer, and the color style in particular, the fact that there are lines there, but the color may or may not be in them, is very much sort of a throwback to that, or not even a throwback, it was a direct reference out of the two. It does mean that if you do have that, there's a lot less quality control, which is also significantly cheaper for the production, so it makes sense. So if you're going to do something like that, absolutely bring it in to the point where it doesn't particularly matter if this isn't in here. If you want to do this as a deliberate art style, then great. So this opening sequence is a jazz number, and it goes all over the place. And what did you think of it?
I really liked it. I kind of get a bit nostalgic for those kind of Disney movies, particularly because they don't just do, I suppose, what we're used to now with, as you mentioned, just black background and white writing. They kind of go all out, and it's almost kind of like each different animator, I don't know if this is the fact, but that's how it comes across. Each different animator was given a part of the opening credits to animate and to have look a certain way, so they kind of each put their own unique spin on it in a way, I guess. So yeah, it's nice. I really like when they have the credits up front. I don't know if I would like every movie now to do it, because I like having the option as to whether I need to immediately exit the cinema because I desperately need a wee, or if I want to sit and appreciate everybody's name.
Yeah, and it certainly gave you that option at the time because they were short enough. Now, however, it would just be like, would you come on? I've already sat through 20 minutes worth of trailers.
Hi, hello, Marvel.
Yes.
So then we have the opening sequence, and we get to meet our initial first character, who you don't see at first, but you do hear him narrating, and then you get to finally find out that it is in fact not the human. It is the lovely doggo Pongo, who is our main protagonist initially anyways. He is.
He's voiced by an Australian actor called Rod Taylor, who was, I think, active all the way... He was active for nearly 80 years worth of a career, which is really quite remarkable. But Pongo is very much as you say, with the voices of all of the characters, as you mentioned earlier, he has a deeper voice than his pet, the human Roger Radcliffe, with whom he lives, and in what's essentially a bachelor flat in London. And poor Pongo cannot figure out why on earth noble Roger cannot find himself a mate.
Yeah, so he starts gazing out the window and seeing all of his options and all of the people that directly match their doggos. And this section is hilarious because the way they animate everybody is so funny. And all the different dogs and the very clear personality of all the dogs as well. And the direct influence that either their humans have on them or more likely vice versa. So I always find this scene really, really funny because you get to see a bunch of different types of dogs.
You do indeed. You see everything from a particularly well-kempt poodle with a lovely animation style around the extra poofy bits, which is just like squiggly lines that move, though that was a very nice touch. You get the little sort of frumpy bulldog, which is also a big thing. One thing that I wanted to draw attention to just before Pongo looks out the window is he is going through a bunch of different magazines. And they're of a time, the particular magazines that Mr. Roger Radcliffe looks at. For example, one of the headlines reads, The Last Age of Chivalry.
Right.
So that's a comment in and of itself. But the scene that transpires outside, Pongo's not really seeing all that much that appeals to him or he thinks will appeal to Roger. That is until he sees a dog very similar to him.
Oh yeah, he gazes his eyes on the lovely Perdita and her owner, Anita.
They put a lot of thought into that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I get it, but they may as well have everything synthesized, I suppose. So Pongo then gets it in his head that this is the doggo for me, this is the lady for Roger, so he very sneakily changes the time, grabs his lead, and he's going for a walk and ain't nobody gonna stop him.
Doggo's doing a Plotto.
Exactly. He did say that he had a rough idea at one stage during this scene, and it just made me cackle because I love a good pun.
There's a lot of dog-based puns in this opening bit.
Yeah. The other note that I have here is that Roger looks like he went to Trinity.
He looks like a mixture of someone who did go to Trinity and Ryan Tuberty.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Definitely
And
has a Ryan Tuberty-esque.
he certainly does. And of course, he never stops working until after 5. So Pongo, as part of his plan, very neatly changes the time on the clock.
Yeah.
And then proceeds to drag Roger outside for a very, very aggressive walkies.
Yeah, they venture to the park and they observe all the ladies that they've seen previously. Apparently, people that walk down this road only exclusively go to the park. Mm-hmm. So they get to see all of the lovely ladies that have passed by beforehand and their doggos until they make their way to Perdita and Anita. And Perdita is a very Perdita is a very well behaved dog. She is sitting very nicely, and until Pongo tries to disrupt the whole goddamn thing.
He does, and he decides that rather than what he assumes Roger is going to do, which is sit down on the grass and puff away at his pipe, which he duly does, he decides, no, I'm going to use this opportunity in order to bring these people together. I'm going to steal Roger's hat.
He does. He steals his hat. They have a little kerfuffle, shall we say. They do pique some interest in Anita and Perdita, which unfortunately ends up with everybody taking a bit of a tumble.
Yes, they do. Specifically, all the way into a lake.
Not the ideal. And Anita is not pleased.
Not the ideal. She is not pleased at all. Her handkerchief is completely sodden. Roger offers her his handkerchief, and of course it is also completely ruined, and that leads to them magically falling in love and la-di-da-di-da-di-da.
Yeah, and 5 seconds later they're getting married, and the stained glass window of the church is beautiful.
It is. However, they're playing like a funeral dirge in the background of that scene.
A funeral what?
Like a funeral dirge, like there's a particular register on an organ that you can go to, which is more for like solemn occasions. That's the one they use. Weddings are generally like a lot more upbeat.
I have never in my life heard the word dirge before.
What, heard the word dirge?
No.
Yeah, no.
Huh, you learn something new every day, folks.
So there you go.
So they get married. The doggos symbolize that they are apparently also getting married. It's very cute.
It is very, very cute. It's a very short scene, but it's a really nice one.
Yeah. So they move into a very cute little house in London, and we then get Pongo's hilarious face when Perdita tells him about the puppies.
He goes very, very, very dopey, a little bit drunk, quite frankly.
Yeah, which is, I think, entirely fair. And then we get arguably the most iconic Disney villain song potentially ever, Cruella de Vil.
We do indeed, and this is, of course, heralding the upcoming arrival of Cruella, because Roger has written this lovely little ditty, but he hasn't put any words to it yet. Yeah. So we get the opening bit of da-dum da-da-dee, da-dum da-da-dee, and so on.
I would just like to point out that Breffney does a remarkable version of this via mouth trumpet.
I do indeed. Would we like a demonstration?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, very good.
Beautiful. Well done,
Thank you
sir.
very much.
Well done, sir. I will, I suppose, kind of cover music a little bit later, but I think the Cruella de Vil song is just so catchy, and it suits the time period so well.
Oh, it really does. This is a very sort of classical song in terms of the era. So you can tell, for example, that this movie is set in a much earlier time period than the 1960s in which it's made. It feels a lot more like the 30s.
Yeah.
So as a result, it's a lot more sort of, not quite ragtime, but not worlds away from it. It's very sort of dance hall and music hall music. And this fits incredibly well because you can just see this being played at like any jazz venue anywhere, sung by someone presumably in a very, you know, presumably sung by a performer completely surrounded by rings of cigarette smoke. In just, it's very, very sort of lounge type music. And it fits Cruella so incredibly well because it almost sounds like it's highbrow in terms of how it's composed, like, you know, of a greater station, if you will. And then it goes in the sort of direction that you realize, actually, no, hang on, this is not someone to be trusted. And the best thing about this is a rare example of a villain song that isn't actually sung by the villain.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of almost sung in mockery of her, because Roger then takes to taking the utter piss out of her, giving absolute panto vibes.
Oh, completely. He is not a fan of Cruella, and who could blame him, quite frankly?
No. She's arguably
weapon.
Yeah, she's arguably my least favourite villain, just because she wants to hurt doggos, and I'm just not about that life.
You were never going to be down with a villain who wanted to essentially skin dogs.
No.
So the fact that Cruella is also every type of over-aggrandized socialite that would have existed around that era who's completely forgotten where they came from, which, as is pointed out very early on, is the same place Anita came from because they were schoolmates.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I always forget that. And that they're meant to be the same age. She's just haggard AF.
Yeah, I remember as a kid, I always thought Cruella was Anita's boss.
Yeah, so did I.
Because I could never figure out exactly why you would keep someone like that in your life and not just tell them to get bent and just get away from you in life. Because, however, I think Anita writes her off as eccentric. That's not what she is.
No, she's a weapon.
She's an absolute weapon. And of course, when Cruella does make her grand entrance, Roger duly goes upstairs. Magically, there's a piano in the attic. So God knows how they got it up there, but there is one, and he starts playing the piano very, very loudly and very obnoxiously while tapping on the floor, and we get Cruella coming in and not really actually paying attention to anything anyone else says.
Oh no, she's remarkably self-involved, and I think potentially has probably about size 12 feet.
Yeah, there are definitely clown shoes going on.
Everything about her is over-exaggerated. The split hair, the ridiculous makeup, the ginormous fur jacket. Like, she's so over the top in every way, shape, and form.
She is, and in a way that gives her no redeeming qualities whatsoever. Even down to the fact that her skin tone is several stages lighter than anyone else in the film. She looks completely emaciated.
Yeah. They do such a good job of animating her as a villain. Like, every inch of her looks like a villain.
It absolutely does. And even though her clothes are big and opulent and everything, it just looks like pure excess. But even down to little details, like, bear in mind, Roger smokes a pipe throughout most of the scenes he's in.
Yeah.
But his smoke is just like either white or a slight grey. Cruella's is bright yellow.
And lingers
And sticks around. And for whatever reason, Cruella also doesn't particularly seem to mind putting a smoke out on a muffin or then lighting another one and knocking the ashes off into someone's tea.
She's so rude. I also wrote down, and it's a general life rule that I stand by. There are two types of people that you should never trust in life. One is someone that isn't nice to dogs. So if somebody refuses to pet a dog, they ain't the person for me. Equally, people that dogs / generally all animals don't like and will not go near. I also never trust these kind of people. And the doggos want nothing to do with her.
Yeah, not at all. And quite rightly too. Pongo in particular has absolutely no interest in her being around. And Cruella claims that she is going to be back for the puppies. More accurately, because she expected them to already be there.
Yeah, she doesn't know how gestation works.
No, she doesn't really seem to understand that pregnancy takes time. So she says she's going to be back in a few weeks. and I believe it's 3 weeks, and cut to exactly 3 weeks later.
Yeah. Before we move, though, there are a couple character similarities that I wanted to just call out. So we have Anita, and she looks like what I assume Wendy from Peter Pan looks like once she hit her 30s.
Yeah, actually.
They look remarkably similar. And then we have the house nanny. Why they have a nanny, I have no idea, because they only have 2 dogs. But anyways. And she is just a carbon copy of Flora from Sleeping Beauty.
Oh, it looks like exactly the same character. In fact, I'm fairly sure it might be the same voice actress.
Yeah, it probably is. Disney it was very commonplace for them to do that to reduce costs, because if they already had an ideal sequence that they had animated or an ideal character that they had animated, they could make some minor tweaks and just reuse them again, especially as a background character.
Yeah, which makes absolutely perfect sense.
We then move on to the next scene, and it's October, the best month of the year, and we have Many a Puppy is Born.
15 puppies specifically, which sends Pongo into a similar catatonic state once he realizes just how many puppies he's going to have to look after now.
15 puppies! Perdita deserves a bloody gold medal.
Perdita did very, very well, and everything is looking very rosy. Everyone's very happy. Roger and Pongo are dancing around the kitchen, which is a lovely scene.
It's very cute.
And then Nanny comes in with one of the puppies.
Poor little Lucky.
Poor little Lucky doesn't look like he made it, and Roger's consoling Pongo until he figures, actually, no, let's see what we can do here, and manages to revive the puppy.
He saves the pupper.
He saves the puppy, and good man, Roger.
It looks like a napkin that they have the puppy in or something like that, and you see the tiny little snoot, and it's just the cutest thing.
You do see the little snoot. It is very adorable. Cruella comes back and immediately tries to buy the puppies.
What a wagon.
What an absolute wagon. And this is unfortunately something she's only interested in after being told that their spots are going to come through in a few weeks.
Yeah. She comes storming in like a bloody banshee, screaming all hell.
Yep, she is not happy at all with this. And she also doesn't like being told no.
No, she gets very annoyed at Roger, because Roger is point blank refusing to give her a single puppy, which, fair play to him.
Absolutely, because if nothing else, Roger senses that there's something very odd about this request.
Yeah, he gets those creepy vibes from her. He can tell she's a villain. He's a smart guy. He went to Trinity.
He went to Trinity. He is indeed a smart guy. One thing I wanted to call out in this scene, aside from Cruella vowing revenge, whatever necessarily that revenge is for, I'm not actually costing you money. But anyway, she really wanted those puppies seemingly, so she vows revenge, and she storms out of the house. Meanwhile, Nanny's an interesting character in this scene.
Yeah.
Because for whatever reason, she goes especially Irish.
She does.
She goes exceptionally Irish at this whole thing, and she does it in a few different moments. There's one moment later on which I'll call out at the time. But she seems to end every single sentence that she has in this scene with, oh!
So it's a few weeks later, the puppies have all got their spots, and they are sitting around all in the sitting room watching some cutie little doggo westerns called Thunderbolt.
They're watching Thunderbolt, and Thunderbolt is their hero, and he will outsmart every single human out there. So this is pretty much a direct lift of a number of the sort of the Western serials, like things like Gunsmoke, that would have been extremely popular at the time, that went on for years. Except obviously the protagonist is not some wheelin' dealin' hotshot cowboy. Instead, it's a dog, and it works out very well. It also borrows rather a lot from Lassie, unsurprisingly. Yeah. And it also has a pretty low-key joke, which is about the way a lot of these initial TV broadcasts also were sponsored rather than running adverts. So this in particular was sponsored by a brand of dog food called Canine Crunchies.
Yeah. And we have the lovely jingle from Canine Crunchies, which is very addictive, but it does get lots of waggy tails.
It gets lots of waggy tails. They are on board with Canine Crunchies. And Canine Crunchies isn't actually really mentioned again, but you do see it pop up in a couple of different scenes. There's a big neon sign at one point advertising Canine Crunchies, and it shows up on the side of a couple of vans as well as in, I think it's in a shop front. So it does show up a few times, but it's nice consistency. And there's one particular dog who I want to draw attention to who is particularly excited about this part of what he's watching, and that is Rolly.
He is such a little chunker. He's so freaking cute.
Rolly is absolutely adorable. Now, it's true that he doesn't actually have that many lines in the film, and over 60% of them are "I'm hungry,"
which is fair.
But not, which is very fair. I can empathize directly with him. However, not all. One thing to kind of draw attention to at this point is that out of the 15, not all of the puppies either get names, and the other thing is not all of the puppies get personalities.
This is true. I mean, in fairness, it would be an extortionately long movie if they were to try give character and characteristics to all of these puppies. I do wish some more of the lady puppies were given some personality, because the only three that you mainly hear from are Rowley, Lucky, and Patch.
Yeah, that's about it. The others do say bits and pieces, but it's much more reactionary than anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. So then Mama, Dad, Pongo, and Perdita take their humans out for a walk, and then some bad shit happens.
Indeed it does, because Horace and Jasper are waiting around the corner in their van. Watches Pongo, Perdita, Roger, and Anita go around the Johnny Order as they shoehorned in.
Oh, okay.
A little bit. They every now and again, Horace and Jasper would slip into Cockney rhyming slang, but wouldn't actually do it correctly. It was a little bit odd. But anyway, so they decided that they wanted to go in and have a look at these puppies for themselves.
And Nanny's not having it.
Nanny is not having it. They claim to be from the electric company. They barge their way in through the door, and after the initial sort of pitch didn't work, that doesn't work particularly well, Nanny goes extremely Irish here and says, "You big weasel."
I totally missed that.
Yep, it's "you big weasel." It's even with that little quiver at the end, and this is when she gets not quite locked upstairs, but gets kind of completely slapstick tricked into falling into a bunch of things upstairs. Meanwhile, the puppies are stolen and everyone runs out of the building. Nanny runs downstairs to kind of see what they've stolen, is not expecting the puppies to be gone, and instead the puppies are stolen, and she runs out into the street absolutely completely crestfallen and screaming for help.
She goes full like bad Shakespeare acting. Like, oh my god, won't somebody think of the puppies? Like, don't get me wrong, I would be the exact same. But it's actually pretty comical. Her reaction is so over the top, but in all the best ways. It's hilarious.
It's hilarious, but it's for something that is over the top. You can kind of understand. I think the part of the thing is because Nanny can't quite decide where she's from, as mentioned before. So it does keep slipping back and forward in a few different ways.
Yeah.
So that does kind of amplify it a little bit, but it's a very sad scene, and everything is really quite desperate. So of course the next scene is a complete juxtaposition, which opens up with what I've written down in my notes as Cruella de Nap. And
oh my god, she's in her rollers. She's got her creams on.
She's living her best life. And the other note that I have here is cheekbones.
Yeah, I have it down that I'm totally backtracking consistently here. A lot of people are animated in almost kind of like the way that they're a caricature. So like Anita's quite like small and timid, so she has very like petite features. Roger kind of comes across like he'd be a bit of a pompous arsehole, so he's a big ginormous nose. Cruella has a chin that could chop cabbage in a milk bottle, as my dad would say. It's very pointed. Yes. And these two lads have unrivalable noses. Like, good lord.
The noses are... That's kind of a bit of a running Disney thing, like kind of in my end, whereas maybe it's just like almost like a point of if you're an ugly character, you will have a big, ugly, misshapen nose, because you can kind of see that the entire way down. With Horace and Jasper, it's just such a strange little thing, and then with Cruella, she has almost like a Daniela Westbrook nose. It's barely there.
Yeah, but she's got that real evil chin. She
has that very evil chin. She's all angles. She's all triangles. And it looks wrong, and therefore she's just not someone you could ever warm to. So she's in this big mansion, and then before this you go through the newspaper headlines and you see things like you see a picture of Nanny looking at the empty basket and looking all crestfallen. You see another photo of all of the puppies, and turns out obviously it's Cruella who's doing this, and she decides to call Anita to make sure everything's okay and to find out if they found the puppies.
This is why when like the FBI and stuff do criminal profiling, they're always like, oh, the person's going to go back and visit where they go, or they're going to insert themselves into the case. She's a prime example of it. She's a wagon. I hate her.
Yeah, and the thing is, she, again, at this point, Anita labels her eccentric, but she also points out something which I'd completely forgotten, which is that seemingly Scotland Yard had already investigated Cruella.
Curious.
Which is all very odd. You would think that considering that she went out, these puppies are mysteriously stolen, she vowed revenge and got very, very mad when she wouldn't, and somehow she came back clean out of this?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of plot holes we could poke in this movie, so it's that's probably not the main one to follow.
No, but nonetheless, it's one that doesn't sit well with me. But nonetheless, we'll move on.
I won't lie though. So when we see her in her rollers and in her bedroom and all that kind of stuff, I kind of love her bedroom. I won't lie. It's kind of fab.
It's certainly very ornate. It
Yeah.
is. There's a lot of pink. There's a lot of very deep reds. There's a lot of very stark colors, which, if nothing else, help the fact that Cruella has absolutely no color to her herself.
It helps with, I suppose, really contrasting her with everything else that is, because she's a very weird, like grayish purple
Yeah,
almost. So it helps kind of show that yes, she wants to be surrounded by fashion and all this kind of stuff, but she also just looks wretched.
she looks like she smells.
Oh yeah,
That's the best way I can describe it.
yeah, like attic and with like stale smoke
And mothballs. It's just no, absolutely awful. So then we go to Pongo and Perdita, who are understandably completely crestfallen. Pongo is still having interactions with Roger and Anita. However, Perdita is sitting in presumably the little den that was there for the puppies, and she's sitting on the floor in the dark, very, very depressed. And Pongo eventually decides, given the fact that Scotland Yard have come back with nothing, that the one thing they can try is the Twilight Bark.
The Twilight Bark, which is such a lovely scene. And apparently within Walt Disney Animation, they had a weekly newsletter, which was then renamed the Twilight Bark after this movie because they loved the term so much. So
it's a lovely term, and I'd completely forgotten about it.
Yeah. Also, I have a question. Why are Anita and Roger dressed like Inspector Gadget?
I'm going to guess because they had like a whole Sherlock Holmes bit they wanted to do, and then largely just decided not to do it for whatever reason. Or we can just play that fun little game, which is, because we only see what the dogs do, maybe we'll just kind of imagine that there was a whole other, a bit like Lion King 1.5, there was that whole other time. What were Roger and Anita up to?
Yeah, must be. But so the Twilight Bark happens. It initially happens with just Pongo. Then there's a beautiful Great Dane that has a heckin' good bark. And then everybody gets in on it.
We get introduced to a whole mecca of doggos. So we have the message going all the way down the line past a Westie who is behaving entirely like one of my dogs, Poppy, who ironically is not the Westie. If you want to find a dog that is behaving like my Westie, you go with the Scottie, who basically behaves exactly the same way. And at this point, we see various different things, including the neon signs I mentioned earlier, which were around in a later era, but don't really seem to fit with anything else that's gone on in the sort of visual style of this movie.
Yeah,
they're very, very stark.
Yeah, which kind of helps with what you were saying, that the movie does feel like it's set in an earlier time to the 60s. It does kind of feel like it's from the 30s or maybe even the 40s. So the neon signs really do kind of jar a little bit with it.
Yeah, I mean, I understand what they were trying to like bring out a bit more color into the city to make it stand out a lot more, and that works, but that just kind of doesn't really fit for me. But nonetheless, eventually it manages to make its way all across the English countryside to get to Lucy the Goose.
Lucy the Goose. Oh, I love her. She is fab. Definitely a lot of similarities between Lucy the Goose and the geese that are in Mary Poppins. Again, reusing animation. Makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. And Lucy the Goose has a friend who is a bloodhound by the looks of it.
He's a bloodhound.
And bless her, because he has such floppy ears, she has to take his little ear in her beak and hold it for him. And it's honestly, every single time this came on the screen, it just made me howl with laughter.
Yeah, just a really, really nice visual, and it works extremely well. And then, of course,
news gets sent over to a horse, and the horse conveniently has a cat sleeping on it.
Yes, Sergeant Tibbs.
Oh, what a hero. Love Sergeant Tibbs.
Sergeant Tibbs is a great little character. Very, very timid war officer. And plays the role of messenger extremely well. And
is damn good at his job. He's far better than the Colonel is. I'll give him that.
He's a very good mastermind. I mean, ultimately, the entire rescue plan is his idea.
Yeah, exactly. So he then gets in touch with the Colonel, who I can't remember the actual breed of the dog. Maybe Breff can, but it's what I would equate as the Dulux dog.
A sheepdog.
I should know that. I used to have sheepdogs. Anyways.
I'm fairly sure the Colonel is an old sheepdog.
And he thinks that 15 puddles have been stolen.
And he decides to go back to sleep because he can't do much about that, I'm afraid.
So again, that's where Tibbs comes in and saves the day and does a more accurate translation, and they find out that there are in fact 15 puppies have been stolen. not puddles. Imagine stealing puddles. That'd be impossible.
So you get all wet.
Exactly. So the puppies are being held in what is called Hell Hall, aka Phantom Manor.
Phantom Manor, or as it's roughly explained in this, it is the DeVille Mansion, which apparently is supposed to be somewhere in Suffolk, which is a dilapidated ancestral mansion, completely falling apart. But as it turns out, because no one thinks anybody lives there, it's a wonderful place to hide 99 puppies.
99 puppies. I would be so happy in that room.
You would be exceptionally happy, but all you would want to do would be get those puppies out of that circumstance, especially if you saw the state of the building.
Yeah, absolutely. So the cat goes and does a bit of a sneak, manages to creep in and finds the puppies and kind of evaluates how on earth he is going to get them out of it.
He does indeed, and meanwhile, while all this is going on, he initially is just looking for the 15 puppies and instead comes across a whole bunch of puppers without collars, realizing there are 99, but the 15 who already are well used to TV are all of the puppies who are completely glued to a thrilling episode of What's My Crime?
What is this TV show?
This is just a very strange thing, and I'm sure it's supposed to be lampooning something.
Yeah.
But it just doesn't really work. The general concept is just a very strange thing to have in a Disney film, where the idea is that you bring on a current prisoner, and people have to guess what it is that they did to land them in jail, and it's very, very strange. One of the characters is...
And if people guess it right, they get a slightly reduced sentence.
Yeah, and they're like bonus rounds as well, where they can, have an extra luxury as part of their incarceration. It's all very, very strange. And the contestants don't really seem to understand what's going on either, and it's all very, very strange.
Yeah, it's absolutely bizarre. And whilst all this is happening, our two puppy nappers are having sandwiches, and good old Rowley manages to steal himself some lunch meat, and he's delighted with life.
Yes, the little chonker does very well out of this. Admittedly, this is helped by a bit of a kerfuffle between Jasper and Horace, wherein at one point one of them drops their sandwich and it literally just looks like the lettuce fell out.
Yeah.
And it's very, very strange. But anyway, Rowley manages to get the meat out of the sandwich and he's delighted with himself.
Oh, he's so pleased. And I can't blame him, in fairness. He's doing a good thing. Then we have Sergeant Tibbs getting discovered, and the guys are throwing stuff at him and trying to catch him. And all I have in my notes is, I would happily do grievous bodily harm to both of these people.
Yes, they are absolutely horrible and reprehensible the entire time. Not only because they're basically trying to kill all of the dogs and the cat, it is just in general a pretty nasty scene, to be honest.
Yeah, I hate it. I hate it so much. And then we see that Pongo and Perdita have finally gotten word back that they know that the puppies have been found, we know where they are, and they are on the move. They
are very much on the move wherever they can possibly go. And they just get a rough idea, and they decide that they want to use the system from the Twilight Bark to be able to find their way. As soon as they get any sort of indication that the Great Dane has agreed to point them in the right direction and escort them part of the way. So Pongo and Perdita begin their incredible quest to find their kids. Meanwhile, Sergeant Tibbs and the many more than 15 puppies are currently still trying to hide.
Yeah, absolutely. And it then starts to snow, and I have here particularly called out that the animation of the snow is beautiful.
Yes, it really is. It manages to be... It has a lot of layers to it, which is exceptionally hard to do when you're working with the color white. But there is so much done in terms of how fluffy the snow looks. The ice looks equally very, very strong in certain parts and very weak in others. And saying that, there's not a huge amount of, I suppose, dimension to this film. It's very, very flat design, very, very flat color. But whenever they do go onto a three-dimensional plane with it, in as much as they can, obviously, it really, really stands out. And they really do a tremendous job with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So they're on the move, they're making their way to Hell Hall, and in the meantime, Cruella DeVille makes her way to Hell Hall and rocks up in her car. Whoever gave this woman a license should be shot.
Yeah, she is not exactly the world's safest driver, it has to be said.
No, absolutely not. And she is screaming at the two boys that they need to kill and skin these beautiful little puppers. And I hate this woman, and then in all caps, who actively wants to kill puppies?
Yeah, this is generally pretty horrible. If nothing else, Cruella just shows that not only is she incredibly mean to puppies, she's also a horrible human being to other humans.
Yeah, she's trash. She's trash all right.
She is absolute trash. However, Jasper and Horace really want to finish watching What's My Crime for some obscure reason before they have to take care of all of the puppies, presumably because part of them also wants to avoid having to do it. It also gives Cruella a lovely little bit of time to get a head start and leave, which is very, very handy. So that allows Sergeant Tibbs and the puppies to hatch an escape plan.
Yeah, so he starts gradually getting the puppies to go back through the little hole in the wall that he's found and escape. And this is working pretty well, except for two puppies that kind of cause a little bit of a problem. We've got Lucky, who is glued to the TV and does not want to leave it. And then we have poor little chunky Rolly, who just can't fit. He is too thick.
He's too much of a big boy, I'm afraid.
Yeah. And unfortunately, this does lead to them being discovered. However, Tibbs does a damn good job of navigating a giant dark house with 99 puppies.
He does a fantastic job and keeps them all remarkably together. Very disciplined.
I know. Such good doggos.
Such good doggos, but also such good leadership. I think it was actually very clever as a plot point to have Sergeant Tibbs be a sergeant, for lack of a better term, because it would make sense that he'd be able to get them all as organized as they did. So I did like that point. I thought it was very nice. But of course, all this leads to a literal dogfight when finally it is discovered that the puppies are trying to escape. And one thing that I really noticed in this scene is that the lighting changes. So up until this point, the background of DeVille Mansion or Hell Hall is very, very blue and purple and very removed from any sort of warmth. The second it turns into a fight, everything turns red.
Oh, I didn't notice this.
Yep, literally everything turns red, and it turns especially red when everyone starts fighting a little dirty.
Yeah, which I was not a fan of. I have also in all capitals, don't kick the doggos. Because at this stage, Pongo and Perdita rock in, and Pongo ain't taking no shit.
He absolutely is not. And promptly does the typical dog thing of biting one of them in the ass.
Which it's never not funny.
It's never not funny. We also get the same person to reveal that, in complete stark contrast to everything, they're wearing basically pink bloomers.
Yeah. Again, another quite traditional, hilarious trope, but I love it. Perdita legit throws a man in the fire.
Yes, she does.
And I can't blame her.
No, I absolutely can't. If someone was basically trying to kill your kids, you would probably do about the same thing.
If I just saw someone trying to kill a puppy, I'd do the same fucking thing.
Yeah, entirely true. And the puppies, Pongo, Perdita, and Sergeant Tibbs mercifully get a little bit of extra time. Mm-hmm. And they get this quite simply because the house decides to collapse on top of Jasper and Horace, which slows them down massively so.
Couldn't happen to nicer people.
Absolutely not. And from that point on, the chase very much begins.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a little kind of family reunion moment with the 15 puppies and Pongo and Perdita, and it's really, really quite sweet. It's such an adorable little scene. And of course, Rowley's hungry.
God forbid he wouldn't be.
Exactly. So they then decide that they are not just going to take their own 15 puppies, they are going to bring all 99 puppies with them.
Because why not? Can't leave any puppies behind, quite frankly.
No, absolutely not. And they start going on a trek and they do some ice skating and it's hilarious.
So Rowley slips and it is one of the most adorable things you'll ever see because he basically does a little pirouette and then just kind of eventually manages to get back up again. And the dogs continue down this way, of course, because obviously they will leave no tracks, which up until this point they had when they went through the barn. That's how they were discovered again. And finally, this is the way to as best they possibly can, make slow progress away and not be tracked. Now, of course, this leads to Cruella showing up.
Dun, dun, dun.
And her very angry car.
Yeah. It's
a very small detail on the front design of Cruella de Vil's car, which I think is based off a mid-1930s Mercedes 500K, if I'm right. Which is like this very, very, very long wheelbase, very old-style cabriolet. There's a very small thing they did, which is they put basically angry-looking, almost like eyelids, on the front headlamps of Cruella de Vil's car, so it always looks angry when it's approaching.
I mean, it makes sense.
It makes perfect sense, and it's a very, very nice character detail. And to be honest, you'd be terrified as well if you had Cruella as your driver.
Oh my God. Like, they need to take this woman's license away. She is an absolute hazard.
She's an absolute menace and tries to kill multiple people multiple times throughout the rest of this film, to be perfectly honest. But cutting back to the puppies, who are now obviously being given chase by Jasper and Horace in their rickety old van, and Cruella in her big evil bad guy car, for lack of a better term. There's no way a good guy would drive that car. Poor little Lucky is completely frozen and completely straggling on the end, and he goes through all of the things that he lists are frozen. And eventually they encounter a dog who is not named.
It's
but
Lassie.
Might as well, but it's Lassie.
Lassie comes to save the day, like he always does.
And mercifully offers them shelter in a nearby hay shed or nearby barn.
And in the barn is what can only be described as an absolute bunch of Marys, being all of the cows.
Particular two of them are properly given names. That is Princess and Duchess.
Oh, but of course. How could they be called anything else?
Very, very regal names.
There's a really odd scene in this. So the puppies get there. They're obviously all starving. And there's only so much Perdita can do about that. And the cows offer for the puppies to drink from them. And it's a really weird scene that apparently was actually quite controversial back in the day, funnily enough.
It's very strange, and I think they would get away with it if it wasn't for the reaction shot from whichever one of the cows it is once the puppies start drinking the milk. It's just like, lads?
Yeah, it's really quite strange.
It's a bit off-putting. I mean, I can understand it, but it's also like, why is this in here?
Yeah. So they have a little nap. They have a little drink. The cows are keeping them safe. Unfortunately, though, they do get found.
They do. Cruella very much catches up with them.
So they are back on the move to some very jaunty marching music, which I won't lie, kind of loved. And they encounter some more helpful doggy friends. They come across a black Labrador, which I don't know the name of. Do you know the name of the dog? Does he have a name?
Does not actually have a name.
Aw, sad times.
But... And this little Labrador is in the little village of Dinsford, and they are hiding in what looks like kind of an old workshop.
Yeah,
which is of course completely filled with a very large fireplace, and as a result, rather a lot of soot.
Handy that.
Yeah, I wonder what they're going to do with that.
So we also see this hilarious scene where Cruella sends her two cohorts on the long route to Dinsford, and she takes the more direct route in the most unsafe way possible, because why would she do anything else?
Oh, of course.
But in the meantime, our black Labrador friend has his pet is going to be making his way into central London with his giant truck. So he's arranged that the puppies just need to be transported into said truck, and then they will be brought back home. However, that's when good old Cruella shows up.
That is indeed when Cruella throws up, and she figures out that much like this was a very war movie type scene.
Yeah.
Almost like Cruella was pretty much, say for example, to go with the era, she would have been like a German soldier searching out whomever they were looking for, should we say. Yeah. And we get these really very intimidating shots of Cruella just driving past very slowly, staring and leering in the window. It's all very creepy.
Yeah, not a fan. So because they know that Cruella and the boyos are outside, they decide the best option is to coat everybody in a lovely layer of soot to hide their spots and make them look like just regular old black doggos, all 100 of them.
And this buys them a surprising amount of time.
Yeah, you kind of have to wonder. I mean, I'm not giving them a whole lot of credit. I don't think any of the villainous people in this movie are particularly smart, but you kind of have to wonder, how would you not question it?
If you see more than like 3 puppies, you might start going, leave alone the fact that they're looking very, very hard in this realistically very small village, and yet they just kind of see these dogs just going past, and there's clearly been many, many of them, and they don't just go, aha, definitely can't be them.
It's just so weird.
And I think it's nearly like 70 of them over, most of which have already been seen and kind of loaded into the truck. It's all very, very strangely done, but it was a means to an end. And then when the poor little puppers are making their way towards the van, snow starts to melt off the roofs of some of the buildings.
And remarkably, if only it was this easy to actually get dogs clean, but it seems like they just need a single drop of water and sure, Jesus, all the soot's gone.
Yes, that would be absolutely fantastic. And And then rather a large amount of snow completely covers one of the pups and reveals that in fact he is in fact not a Labrador.
Yeah, so then we get a very stressful few scenes of them trying to get the last few puppies, get them into the truck. Mercifully they manage it. And then begins the chase scene between this truck driver who hasn't a bloody clue what is going on or why this deranged woman is chasing him, and Cruella de Vil.
The truck driver is remarkably calm about this entire thing, considering that Cruella tries to not only run him off the road and down a cliff once, he does it twice. And you do have like the thing of like crazy woman driver, which is very, emblematic at the time.
Yeah.
But it was just that, like, how do you not understand that this woman is actively trying to kill you?
Yeah. He's much more chill than you would be in that same scenario.
Than I would be.
Yes.
Oh, most certainly. But then again, I greet all idiot drivers with complete passive aggression.
Which is always very comical to watch.
It is very well. Well, thank you very much for finding it so funny. But
it's funny for me. I'm not driving.
Yeah, it's terrifying for me. but nonetheless.
So Cruella, as you mentioned, tries to drive the truck driver off the road several times, only to then be driven off the road by her own cronies in such a glorious moment. And I'm just like, okay, bye.
It's a really great moment, but it's very... There is one little bit that happens just before this, which is when there's a very brief shot of Cruella from the puppy's perspective, and she has these creepy as hell glowing red eyes.
Yeah,
she's terrifying. She's terrifying. Does a crash zoom into it, and it's just the most terrifying thing. And then, unfortunately, because Jasper and Horace, they are overdriving their rickety old thing, they end up going down a snowbank instead of down the road, so Cruella's plan does not work, and they end up both flying out of the car. I have no idea how no one is dead, because they plunge into a ravine. At one point, the car legitimately rolls over Cruella.
Yeah, oh yeah. Couldn't happen to a nicer lady.
And she's sitting there berating Jasper and Horace, sitting there in the snow, and they finally just very limp-wristedly, but it's something that I really did like. One of them just goes, shut up, while she's busy kind of going off, which was a nice moment of catharsis, so I did enjoy that. And then that cuts back to, we're back with Roger and Anita again.
And it's Christmas!
It's Christmas, but nobody is in a particularly celebratory mood, least of all Nanny.
I have it. I was hoping you were going to mention Nanny. I have a very niche comment about Nanny. In the space of this movie, she has aged worse than Simon Harris.
Oh, that's a good comment, actually, yeah.
She looks miserable. And don't get me wrong, I don't blame her. If I blamed myself for the disappearance of 15 puppies, I would probably be acting the exact same. But Jesus, the way they animated her to look... Haggard feels like too negative a word, but I feel like it's the most accurate way to describe how she actually looks, or how she looks like she feels.
Yeah, she looks like a very wet day, is basically the best way I can describe it.
What a way to put it.
Yeah, she looks like, perhaps that was the wrong choice of word. She looks like an exceptionally rainy day, like borderline floods, just completely crestfallen, can't even look up. She's doing the very sort of stare down at the ground, tea for everyone type thing. And it's not really working out. Meanwhile, all of the success that Roger has had, because his song is playing on the radio and doesn't particularly want to listen to it because he's quite sad but still getting on with work. Seemingly, Roger's first song, which is about Cruella, is a big hit.
Hey, good man. He's having his little fame moment, but he can't enjoy it because he misses his puppers until
it would seem there's a bit of a knock at the door.
This is honestly so cute, because if you have ever had a pet disappear or go missing or anything like that in any way, shape, or form, it's difficult to describe how this moment feels. Have you ever had a pet go away and come back?
Yes, I have.
How would you describe it?
You get this very, very strange, mixture of massive relief and complete joy.
Yeah.
It's a very, very strange feeling, and it's over-amplified in every possible direction, but it's just like, oh, thank Christ this has happened. It's very strange, and it's not like any other feeling you can have.
Yeah. Absolutely. I remember when my old cat Gizmo disappeared. He'd gone for 2 days, which was very unlike him. He was predominantly a house cat, and he was my mom's baby, and he disappeared the day before she went on holidays. So she had rang me every 2 hours whilst she was on holidays, sobbing down the phone to find out if Gizmo had come back. He hadn't at this stage. And he used to occasionally come in through my parents' window if the window was left open and if he was outside and he fancied coming in. So she'd made me promise to stay in their room and leave the window open just in case he happened to come back. And I remember getting woken up at 5 o'clock in the morning and he had come in, he had jumped through the window and was like, standing on top of me. And if you have a cat or if you spend a lot of time with a cat, cats have two settings. They can either feel light as air or they can make themselves exceptionally heavy. And he was making himself real heavy and he was sitting on my chest, and I've never been more terrified to be woken up in that manner, but also so overjoyed and relieved that he had come back. And this was like 5 o'clock in the morning.
It's very cute. That also tracks with every single story you've told me about Gizmo.
Oh, Gizmo was a gremlin by name and gremlin by nature, through and through.
Very much sounds it.
So we have all the puppies back, including the additional 84 puppies? No.
Yep.
Is that 84?
Yes, 84 puppies.
Oh, look at me with the fast maths.
Yeah.
So, including the additional 84 puppies, and most people would probably be like, well, in fairness, most people would have been like, 15 puppies, that's way too many, let alone 99 puppies. However, these people are quite like myself and Breffney, and they're like, oh yeah, no, we'll keep them all. And they want a Dalmatian plantation and create a whole jaunty song about it.
They do, which I'd completely forgotten about as a song. And we watched this, 2 days ago?
Yes.
And I've mostly forgotten the song, except for the fact that it's one of those very early radio type things where it's just, let's take a complicated word that actually rhymes with a lot of other words and put them all together and see what happens.
Yeah.
So I think it goes something like, we'll have a Dalmatian plantation where our population can roam, and it's just, it's very much of the era and it does fit, but it's otherwise completely forgettable as a song.
It's also, I don't know, the word plantation is rarely used, and it's just, it's very bizarre. But anyways, Pongo and Perdita start singing, and it's adorable.
It is, and it proceeds to wake up the entire neighborhood, which leads to the closing shot of the film, which is all of the lights in London coming on to presumably woken up by this song, but also joining into it, which is a very sweet ending.
Yeah, I have super cute ending at the end.
It's very, very nice indeed.
So we've kind of talked through the movie as a whole. So we're going to very quickly go through and give our ratings for our four main things, which is music, animation, story, characters, and then we'll do our additional how we would like to see this brought into the parks. So first and foremost, I think this is probably the quickest one anyways, what would you give it out for music?
Now, this is a very tough one, because the music in this is otherwise completely forgettable.
Yeah.
It's only incidental music. There's a bit of a score going on in the background, but it's very functional. It doesn't really stand out into anything else. But this movie does include the Cruella de Vil song,
which is arguably one of the best villain songs. It's definitely one of the more addictive villain songs.
Oh, completely. And it's also one that has been around for so long that everyone knows it. Even if you haven't seen that film, you know the Cruella de Vil song.
Yeah. So what are you giving it out of 5?
There's only so far the Cruella song can save the music for this film. For me.
Okay.
I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5.
Okay, fair.
Cruella is the entirety of the 2. But the rest of it wasn't particularly of an era where Disney were putting that much into giving character to their scores. Which makes sense, is because especially the cost of an orchestra, even a live-in orchestra, is enormous, and they were trying to do this very cheaply for the time. So that does make sense. However, aside from the Cruella de Vil song, not that much to discuss here.
Okay, fair. I'm going to give it a 2.5 purely because I absolutely adore the Cruella de Vil song. But there were a couple songs throughout it, like as I said, the jaunty marching music, which I actually really enjoyed. So again, I think there's only really one standout song from it. So yeah, I'm going to give it a 2.5.
Okay, that's fair enough.
So next up, what did you think of the animation? What are you gonna rate that?
Now this one's an interesting one, because there are a few different styles kind of coming in here. The main thing, as I mentioned at the very start of this, was that this is a slightly different animation style to one that Disney had kind of used elsewhere, where they kind of use this color scattering, which again is very much reminiscent of French animation around the same era. And it weirdly fits this story, because it takes everything kind of a little bit out of the human world and everything's a little bit blurry.
Yeah.
And because this story is ultimately told by dogs, it comes from a different perspective. And with this, they pay attention to the humans and all the actual characters are very well defined. Everything else isn't. It's a bit kind of thrown together. So anything that the dogs pay attention to are very well animated. Everything else is a bit all over the place. But that kind of makes sense in the context of the story. It's not the most rich in terms of color. There's no sort of standout scene you'll look at and just go, this is amazing. Having said that, it's perfectly fine for the time. I'm going to go ahead and say this is a 3.5.
Okay, I think that's fair. I think, much like you're saying, like, I think the background is a little wishy-washy, for lack of a better way of saying it. I think the way the characters are animated specifically is really crisp and it's really clean. And it doesn't necessarily, like we keep saying, it doesn't look like these particular characters were drawn so early in the 60s. Like, I mean, the animation in that doesn't look a million miles away from, for example, the animals that are animated in The Lion King. Yes, there's a slight upgrade, but they're not worlds apart. And I suppose that's probably because a lot of the animals have very clean lines and stuff like that. So I'm trying to think. I think a 3.5 is pretty fair. I feel like anything less is kind of just being a bit nitpicky.
Yeah, like a 3.5 I also think is a little bit generous, but again, this movie is not designed to look amazing and never had the budget to look amazing. Yeah. But for the era especially, and the fact that this movie is 60 years old, and when we opened up this conversation, we said that we were always very surprised about the age of this film.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like it's of that era. It especially doesn't seem like this is the movie that Disney followed up Sleeping Beauty with. So yeah.
So opulent in every way, shape, and form when it comes to the animation. So I'm looking forward to when we eventually do Sleeping Beauty.
Yeah, I think that'll be a good one.
Yeah. So what do you think of the characters?
Now, it's a very solid character story. This is much more about the relationship between all the characters themselves rather than any sort of huge incidences really happening to them. There's just a bunch of sort of smaller ones and then sort of a follow-up. This is much more of a journey-based film.
Yeah.
And I think that Pongo is a very good character. I think you get used to his voice quite early. It's a bit disarming at the start. Perdita, I don't know what's going on with her voice at the start of the film because she's half French.
Yeah, a little bit.
Which doesn't really seem to make a lot of sense, but again, very, very sweet. Nani's all over the shop. Completely useless in a crisis, but great at sounding the alarm.
And probably making tea.
And she probably makes a whopper scone as well. Beyond that, there's Roger's a good character in himself. He gets a lot more development than you would expect. The fact that he absolutely despises Cruella, but finally does find a way to stand up to her, but it's in a really lame way.
Yeah.
But he does his absolute best. Horace and Jasper are perfectly good dogs' bodies. They do the job very well. Cruella is outstanding as a pure villain.
Oh, yeah.
But even then, there's still part of me which thinks that Glenn Close was the best Cruella.
I agree. And if I'm being completely honest, I think, and Amy's going to listen to this, and Amy is going to absolutely hate me, because this is like one of her all-time favourite movies. I don't think any of the characters are particularly strong, with the exception of Cruella. I think a lot of them are very forgettable. There's not a lot of... I don't know, there's not a lot of there. And normally I will kind of pick a character in a movie and really like grab onto it and like, that's my favourite character. But I don't know, I just don't get that here. I'd say other than Cruella, maybe Sergeant Tibbs, but... Yeah,
Sergeant Tibbs would also be someone who I'd kind of look, because he doesn't actually have that much to say. He's roughly just given orders from stronger characters.
Yeah.
But he is the person who kind of saves everyone.
Yeah.
And does a great job. He's probably the best character overall. And I would love to say that Rolly was the best character, but Rolly's one of the most one-dimensional ones. It's just done in a very cute way.
Yeah, he's just cute and chubby.
Exactly.
So, what are you going to give it out of 5?
For characters, 2.5.
I'm going to give it a 2.
Ooh.
I know, and again, Amy's going to be so mad at me, but I don't think any of the characters in the movie are particularly strong. And don't get me wrong, I really enjoy the movie, but I feel like the characters are a bit so.
The characters are very functional, and as you say, this is about 101 different dogs, and realistically I think about 120 by the time the movie's actually done.
Yeah. In
terms of characters who you actually meet and have to interact with. And there are so few... Admittedly, this is an 84-minute long film. You're not going to get a huge amount of identity, and you were basing this off a book, which gives you a limited amount of playtime.
Yeah.
In terms of being able to figure these things out. For what they had to do, they were always going to be limited from a character basis. But I felt that in some ways the mistakes that kind of exist in how they did this movie, they used that to make Lady and the Tramp later on.
Oh,
which
yeah,
I think
absolutely.
does a vaguely similar thing, but better.
Yeah, absolutely. And last thing is story. So the original story was by the lovely Jodie Smith. What's your takes on it, and what are you giving it out of 5?
The story is ultimately very sweet. It's a kidnapping story, or in this case, a multiple dog napping. There are elements of this which I think are really great. I think the whole thing around the midnight bark is very nice.
Yeah.
I think I would have liked to have seen a bit more of an exploration between the relationship between Pongo and Roger.
Yeah.
It kind of seemed a lot more like they were roommates rather than friends, if you get me.
Yeah.
They didn't actually seem to be hugely close with that. And there seemed to be a definite distance between humans and dogs, which does not exist. And least of all, if you have a dog is the person telling you a story, they're going to be super affectionate about the humans, and that therefore it's going to be a little bit more amplified. Story wise, I kind of felt they could have gone a couple of different directions with this, but in terms of big set pieces, really quite nice. But there's not a huge amount to talk about with this movie, realistically, from a story perspective. So much in all, I really like this movie. It's getting a 2.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. I think I'm going to give it a 3 because I think the overall flow of the story makes pretty good sense. Obviously, there's some very kind of sweet moments and how the kind of characters interact with each other. So yeah, I'm gonna go with a 3. I'm gonna give it a real middle of the road score.
Middle of the road score. I think that's fair.
Yeah. Now, last but not least, if you had the opportunity to bring 101 Dalmatians into the Disney parks, be it via a snack, a drink, a piece of merchandise, a ride, a show, all of that good stuff, what would you do?
I'm tempted to do a cop out here and say that I would do the chicken fillet rolly, which is basically which is basically from if anyone here has friends who live abroad and they are originally Irish, it's a common complaint that you can't get chicken fillet rolls anywhere else in the world. They're just not a thing.
Yeah.
So you have the chicken fillet rolly, which is the same thing but has luncheon meat running through it. That is one thing I might look at adding to the parks. However, I think that you could also do kind of an older style ride, I guess, kind of following them on the puppy's journey back home from Hell Hall. I think you could do kind of a sort of very much a dark ride of that ilk.
Yeah.
As kind of bringing them through the house collapsing and trying to outrun Cruella and Jasper and Horace and all of the things kind of beyond that. I think you could have fun with that. It'd probably be a little bit on the scary side.
Yeah, so what I kind of have in mind is a ride, and I kind of see it as a hybrid between the Alice in Wonderland and Mr. Toad's Wild Ride in Disneyland, and then also the Monsters Inc. one with the flashlights in Tokyo Disneyland. I think if you could kind of combo all those, I think you might have a decent ride. And it could be like little puppies pop out of other places, and then like that scary Cruella comes out of somewhere. That's what I have in my mind.
Yeah, I agree. I also wanted to definitely make use of the scary Cruella because that would be terrifying at the right time.
You could have like a little moment, like, you know, in the Snow White ride in Disneyland Paris when the evil queen turns around and she's the hag and it's scary.
Yeah.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, I think that could work pretty well. So I think our choices are the chicken fillet rolly or whatever you have named your roller coaster. What name would you give it?
Oh god, the Midnight Bark.
Okay, the Midnight Bark.
Yeah. Also, you could also make a really cute Spirit jersey.
You could, and to be honest, I'm amazed they haven't yet.
It'd be so easy. Just put little doggo prints everywhere. You could add little hidden Mickeys into it. It'd be great.
Yeah, I'd be on board with that. So Disney, please go ahead and make that whatever you can.
Yeah. So overall, what are you giving the movie out of 5?
This is a really tough one because I don't think realistically, while I'm very fond of 101 Dalmatians, I can't put it up in a top tier level, and I can't even put it on a next level down. It's very much in the middle for me, so I'm giving it a 3. I think if I'm being truly fair, I'd give it a 2.5. But there are certain things that bring it up. The Cruella song is great. Cruella de Vil as a villain is one of the best pure villains they've ever done, because there's not a good thing about her.
No.
And there's also no real motivation behind why Cruella is so evil. She just is. At least with Scar last week with the Lion King. Yeah, at least she just wants a coat, whereas at least Scar kind of had like years worth of jealousy kind of built up. At least you can kind of understand where he came from. Not what he did, but you can understand how he came to feel that way.
Yeah.
With Cruella, you don't really get anything, and a lot of aspects are a bit underdeveloped, but it's a film about loads of dogs, so I have to give it a decent upkick because of that. So I'm just going to say 3 out of 5.
To be honest, I was kind of thinking around a 3 as well. It's got lots of cute puppies in it. It has a horrific villain and a horrific villain plot line in it. It has a very iconic Disney song in it, and yeah, so I think a 3 is kind of, I think that a 3 is fair. I think it is very kind of mid. It's a mid movie for me.
Yeah, and by no means a bad one. Like, if you sit down and you watch 101 Dalmatians, we strongly encourage you to. Because it's definitely worth checking out, especially if you've never seen it before. And I've no doubt that at some point in the future we're going to get to the Glenn Close version.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited to talk about that, because I think that takes the same material and honestly I think it does a better job.
Yeah, I tend to agree, but we will cross that bridge when we get to it.
We will indeed. And also, there is going to be yet another live-action remake of this film.
There is, yeah, with Emma Stone.
And I'm looking forward to that version of Cruella, to be totally honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to it. I mean, I have my own issues with the new live-action remakes. I'm not a fan. I think they ruin everything that's good about the villains, and not a single one of them has proven anything the otherwise to me. Every single one of the new live action movies has just completely dumbed down the villain to make them not a real villain, and I hate that. They're a villain, let them be a villain, end of. So I will reserve judgment. I think it looks amazing, but unless Emma Stone is actually a villain, I ain't having it.
I think that's entirely fair. Well, sure, it remains to be seen. We'll wait and see.
Yeah. So I think that's everything for this week, sweetie.
I think it is, and thanks again so much to everyone for your positive notes to us on Instagram and for your engagement with the poll.
So that's it. Keep an eye out on the Mickey Waffles Instagram, where we will put up another poll, and you guys can help us pick what movie we're going to watch for next week.
You can indeed, and our thanks very much again for listening.
Yeah, and don't forget to give us a rating on Apple Podcast if that is your podcast listening platform of choice. And stay home and stay safe, and don't be stupid.
Thanks very much, everybody. Good night.
And bye.